wherever the cloud is. Great. So welcome everybody to our 4-part series of A Bride for One Night by Dr. Ruth Calderon. It's a really tremendous work, and I'm excited to share it with you all. So as we are getting ready to say this blessing, I invite you to dedicate your own study to whatever or whomever you could imagine, loving these stories. Perhaps someone who didn't have access to, learn from the Talmud or learn from Jewish texts at all. Perhaps somebody who is kind of a bit of a rebel rouser, whoever it might be for you. And I invite you, if you'd like, to put the name or, whatever information you'd like to in the chat about who you're dedicating your learning to this evening. And we'll say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Great. Oh, look at these amazing people coming into the chat. I feel like they if you do something like that, they step right in. If you invite folks like that, they are sure to arrive. So I'm glad to have Shirley and Elaine with us, and Laura. Look at this. Wonderful. Great. So we'll just dive right in, because I know everybody's going to want to chat and debate and discuss. But just before I do, maybe if you could just share your name and like a word. I'm going to limit to 2 words max of what brings you here tonight. So, Marcia, can I start with you?
Sure. 2 words: perpetual learning.
Amazing. Great. And I'll just go across my screen. Joan.
I am Joan. Growing heart.
Growing heart. Beautiful. And Mark?
Talmud and exploration.
Amazing. And Sharon?
Sharon Amasha, the title.
Great. Good use of the 2 words. John?
Lifelong learning.
Amazing. We'll put the hyphen in there.
Okay.
Ellen?
Curiosity in women's lives.
And Annette?
Studying Talmud.
Great. And Leah?
Rabbi Solomon and
gosh.
Talmud.
Very kind. Janine?
The title.
Yeah. Lucy?
Exploring Talmud.
Yeah. Geraldine?
Talmud and curiosity.
Yeah. And Florence?
Talmud and curiosity.
Beautiful. Great. And my 2 words would be Ruth and rebel. I had the privilege to see Dr. Calderon in action. She came to our rabbinical school, and she, without any introduction, got up to the bima and told one of these stories. And not a not a sound could be heard, because she not only knew the story, but she had taken these people into her entire kind of being, and was like speaking on their behalf as she told the story. And I'd never experienced Talmud in that way, and was really excited and moved to have someone focus on the aspect of what's called Agadah, or the narrative aspects of Talmud. So I'll just give us all really a few basics into kind of the literature of Talmud, and you might know some of this. Obviously, we could spend, many years just covering what is Talmud, but just to orient us for this conversation and the exploration of this literature. And I'll keep emphasizing the word literature because, as you'll see probably in the introduction, Dr. Calderon also just really speaks to, she's reading these from the lens of literature. While she's reading into it, the canon of Jewish texts and the rabbinic library, she very much gives the permission and the kind of unleashing of these stories to be read as literature. So I want to emphasize that, so that we are all on the same page on some level, because you don't need to know everything or anything about Talmud, and at the same time you could, but to really kind of breathe the life back into these people as we might do if we were reading it just purely from, as a book group or a literature group. So unleash yourselves as well is what I would offer to all of us. So just a little bit of background about Talmud, and then Dr. Calderon, and then we'll dive right into the introduction, and then the two stories. So a big agenda. So Talmud, as you probably many of you know, but there are two great kind of learning centers where Talmud was conceived. One in the Galilee, and that becomes what's known as the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. It was kind of written in that whole area, and that happened in the 4th century of the Common Era. And then about 100 years later, in the 5th century, the Talmud was kind of echoed in Bavel, in Babylonia. And at the time, these were two great centers of Jewish learning and Jewish life. And in some ways, the Talmud is really a window into it's the kind of capstone of rabbinic literature in that it's post-temple. So, we could talk at length about this, but after the temple, there was a revolution of how is it that Judaism would stay alive without the sacrificial system. And the answer to that came as learning and as study. And the diaspora centered around these two areas of, intensive Jewish life and community. And those two centers really broadcast their sense of how to live Jewishly without the temple. And that resulted in the Talmud. So I'll just show you a page of Talmud in case you've never seen it. It's pretty awesome to see. In some ways, I like to think of the Talmud as the original internet, because it is full of hyperlinks. And when it was codified, and remember there were two different versions, but when it was codified, the people who codified it knew all of this text by heart. So they were literally kind of living Rolodexes of the Jewish canon. And the topography, the layers of the canon are Torah on the bottom, right? It all begins with Torah. And then on top of that, Mishnah, which is considered the first record of oral law. And the Mishnah was written around 200 CE. And then on top of Mishnah comes Talmud. And what you see here, and I think you'll be able to see, so this is the first page of the entire, what is known as Shas, the entire 6 tractates of the Talmud, 6 orders of the Talmud. And so this being the first page, it starts with the question, Ma'imatai, at what time does one recite the Shema in the evening? So what you have here in terms of layers again, I don't know if it'll let me, oh, it just moves it. That's interesting. Okay, let me see if I can do it here. Oh, there we go. Oh, it won't let me. Okay, well, what you have basically in these first little chunk, it goes from this corner, you don't have to worry about what it says, to this little corner down here. So the first basically 2.5 inches is Mishnah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's like within the heart of the page is found the Mishnah, and following that, starting here where it says Gemara, is the Gemara. And then what you have in around the entire edge is commentary. And what's fascinating is that Rashi is always on the inside of the closest to the spine. And Rashi is one of the probably the greatest commentator. And he's on the inside so that the rats, R-A-T-S, would not eat his commentary because it was considered the most precious. So it's kind of an amazing image into the living experience of these books at that time. And this page becomes a conversation across continents and time. So oftentimes you'll have Rashi over here on the inside, and you'll have his grandchildren on the outside, just as a very, brief example. So Talmud, just to come back, is this repository for conversations about Mishnah. And the Mishnah is legal. What the Gemara does that's so fascinating is it interweaves responsa to both the legal and includes the narrative. So those two terms are halacha, which is legal. Oops, I guess it does it one at a time. And agadah, which is the narrative. So Talmud becomes a place for both legal discussions and storytelling. And the stories that are brought are wild. And some of them are kind of associatively brought, and some of them are brought as proof texts, and some of them are brought, I would say, more about personality, because there's people that are continually mentioned, and sometimes stories are just brought because it's about the same person. Does that make sense? It's kind of this, it's like, I remember my grandparents telling me about, the operator that you would call, whatever the number was, 411 or something, for the switchboard. It's kind of like the switchboard is recording everybody's conversations that they're having on these like private lines that aren't so private, which is probably still going on, by the way. Okay, so that's a bit about Talmud. Again, between 400 and 500 CE, these 2 Talmuds were written. First the Jerusalem Talmud, then the Babylonian Talmud. And Dr. Calderon pulls from both. And there's a reason why she pulls from both for each of the narratives. And she'll touch on that a little bit as we go through. So any questions or thoughts or ideas just on what is Talmud? And we won't do this every time because I know it's probably known by many of you. Okay, so then who is Dr. Calderon? Hopefully you got a little bit of the links that I sent, and I apologize for sending them 12 times. I think honestly the email wouldn't let me send them because there were so many links. So I don't know, I kind of learned, it was a learning experience for me, but she has created a couple different institutions in Israel, one in Tel Aviv and one in Jerusalem. It's sort of, I think of it actually as a metaphor of the two Talmuds, because those are each such unique demographic centers of Jewish life. And it does not surprise me at all that she wanted to be in both of those centers for very distinct reasons. And did any of you have a chance to click on some of those links? Did you watch her presentation to the Knesset? Or okay, some yes, some no. You might want to, at least the one that I would really recommend is where she teaches Talmud at the Knesset. It is incredible. And to see not only her do it with such brilliance and such fluidity, but to see the looks on everyone's faces as she's doing it is like priceless. She was a member of the Knesset and had a very powerful role and did it, politically, but also as a scholar, which is, very unique. She was born in 1961. She's, a young, vibrant, brilliant academic, but also institution builder. And this book comes out of her desire to bridge the gap. And I'll just, would it be helpful for me to share the PDF as I go? To highlight certain areas that I'm going to be touching on, or do you have either the text itself or the PDF? What's most helpful?
Excuse me, is the PDF the text?
Yes. So for this time, I made a copy. I'm hoping I'd like to not make further copies just because I think it's important for folks to buy the book. But this PDF is a replica of the first 14 pages of the book. So everybody has a copy one way or another? Yeah. Okay, super. And if you don't, just please, Joan, I can't see you, but I'm trusting you have what you need. And I put it into the chat. I'll just do it one more time in case anybody wants to grab it from there. Okay, it's coming through in the chat as a PDF. Okay, so what's fascinating to me about this book is that it's really, I was so surprised to learn that she didn't grow up religious, and that in some ways this book is really an expression of her desire to access this part of the canon and then preach on it. One of how I think of teaching is in some ways an opportunity to not just teach, but to preach. And I really could hear her Torah loud and clear. So as I mentioned, she really does it from this perspective of literature. And there were a couple of components. Hi, Noah, welcome. Glad to have you. I just put the PDF in the chat. So hopefully you have the text. Do you have a copy of the text one way or another? No, okay, so let me put it there again. Okay. All right. Great. So a couple of things that stood out to me in the introduction, and I welcome, the dialogue with you all here. is this notion of barefoot reading of the text. She speaks of it on page XIII. I'm not great at knowing what, I think that's 8 or maybe 13. I'm not sure. 13. Okay, thank you. And really describes this idea of unmediated access. And what's fascinating to me about that is that, Jewish tradition is so layered, and especially Jews today, you feel like there's like fences to get into the fences to get into the fences. And here what she's describing is this access, this barefoot reading, which she's coined very much as part of her, just worldview and philosophy. The other things that she picks up on is this notion of, the human dimension. And I'm curious to hear how you all took these first two stories, because they're radically human. And of course, the only way that we understand others is by understanding ourselves. So, it's going to be interesting to hear what you all make of that. And I love what she says at the bottom. It's sort of a psychological family therapy session, which is just so great to think of. It's personal. These texts are not just like religious or not legal, but they're also deeply personal and exposing, in the way that Torah does, I would argue, exposing the psychology of what it means to be human. And Jewish, and living at the times that they were living in. Okay. Was there anything else from the introduction that anybody else found interesting or had questions about? I love, she says, these stories are the Arabian Nights of the Jewish people. It's like,
I wanted to say that I found the writing so clear. There was just such a directness. It was like, oh, wow. She just writes beautifully. I know this is translated, but it was like everything just followed.
I know. I found it very refreshing in that way. Leah and then Marsha.
Just above what you mentioned, I just underlined it earlier tonight, where she said that coming to terms, I'm just going to read the part I loved.
Yeah, please.
The complex cultural legacy that I have no choice but to understand, because it is a part of me and I am a part of it.
Yeah.
I just love that.
Yeah.
It'll touch my soul.
Totally. Complex cultural legacy. Amen. And that she's revealing that, I think, gives us permission to also reveal it for ourselves, which is so great. Yeah. Good. And Marsha, yeah.
One thing that struck me when I initially read the introduction was when she says that each story has at least 2 ways of being read, conventionally and against the grain. And that is at the core of why I had different reactions to the 2 different stories when she went against the grain in Sisters.
Definitely. Yeah. Good. Let's hold that comment just about Sisters, because let's get it connected there. Yeah, Annette.
I really appreciated how she talked about the heroines and the heroes, and how she tried to focus on their actual personal experiences, their actual living conditions, things that aren't really said in the words, but more in between the words.
Absolutely. Yeah, Leah.
The other thing that really caught me was on page 14, second paragraph down, where she's talking about how sometimes the Talmud, I won't read the whole thing, but the stories really irritate her or provoke her because of the way they're talking about women, non-Jews, children, slaves in an immoral way. But then she says at the end of that paragraph to allow space for these other voices in a more fruitful political act than diminishing the whole Talmud is sexist. So it's something I grapple with, and I love the way she addressed that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
I even shared it with my son tonight because I thought that
Very
was so
cool.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's such perfect time, and especially with Purim around the corner, there is so. I've been thinking about the role of groggers, the Rashanim, and we don't censor text in Judaism. We don't highlight it or cut it out. We make noise over it. And the same is true of, what we do with Haman's name and what she's doing there, and how she's articulating it is to say that it's not just that she has a problem with it. It's that there's an opportunity in it, which is very different. I want to give you, those are awesome comments, everybody. It gets me so excited to hear your kind of registering of the text so far. If you haven't looked at the methodology at the top of 15 in the introduction, you'll see, obviously, these are my notes in it. I don't know if they were helpful or annoying, but the numbers there. So, she's looking at it from three levels, the methodology. First is just the straight translation. Secondly, the midrash. And thirdly, her reflections. And I'm putting in the chat now, if you've seen it before, but there is a traditional way, a 4-part way of reading text. It's called Pardes, which is the first letter of each of these modes: Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. And it's interesting to just pair that next to what she's doing, because I found that there's actually both interpretation and a bit of mystery in her reflections, because she's an artist, and I find the layer of artistry, that essence of sod, or that a taste at least of that sod, that mysterious or Kabbalistic, you might say, leaves you wanting more. For sure. So let's go straight into the imaginative map. I think was there anything there that folks wanted to mention? I think we'll find it in the two texts themselves, but I love what she says at the very bottom. The agadic map has a human scale, that you really get like the fingerprints of these people in these stories in some ways. And in some ways you get the total brushstrokes. Okay, so let's dive right in. We have about half an hour to do both stories, which was what I was hoping for. So we'll spend about, 12 minutes or so on each, and leave us just a bit of time to wrap up and get ready for the next episode. So starting with the fish pond, this text is so rich. I felt like Yentl was in the room or something with this text. Anybody want to kind of open the gate or leave the gate with this one, and just any kind of interpretations or thoughts? I don't know. Should we read the brief story just to get it out? Let's do that. Okay. John, would you read it for us? Just the actual. So this is from the Babylonian Talmud in the section called Ta'anit, which means fasts, or fasts, plural. So the times in which communities would fast in order to bring about the rain.
Okay, the fish pond. Rav visited a certain town. He decreed a fast, but no rain fell. A member of the congregation also tried to bring rain. He said, "He who causes the wind to blow," and the wind blew. He said, "He who causes the rain to fall," and the rain fell. Rav said to him, "What do you do?" He said to him, "I teach children. I teach the poor as I teach the rich, And if anyone cannot afford to pay, I teach him free of charge. And for any child who will not learn, I have a pond with fish. I win the student over with a fish. I call to him and appeal to him until he learns to read.
Great. I've missed your voice, John. So good to hear you.
Yeah, I've missed yours. Your
That's
teaching
awesome.
voice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's fun to have a community that get to learn together. So where does she go with this? How would you kind of describe, or what did you find? What she does next is kind of zoom out and give a narrative context for that, those few lines from the sugya, from the section of Talmud. So she kind of paints around that paragraph with who and what and where and when and how. Marcia, did I see your hand?
Oh, maybe.
Great.
No, I was just going to say that she took that small story with no details and no personality and no drama and added all those things.
Yeah.
And that brings us into the story in a way that something, all those things that we're missing are what bring us into the story.
Yeah, absolutely. One biographical note that I found really interesting is, and I underlined it if you're looking at my copy, but is the mention of that he was tall and thin as a reed. Because what's interesting there is she does another hyperlink, which is she knowing, the rabbinic canon, portrays him as thin as a reed, and that's in my mind, at least, a kind of like a bell to say that he had a certain fluidity and malleability, and a reed is often spoken of in contrast to a cedar. That someone who has the flexibility of a reed is of greater kind of merit and esteem than someone who is as strong as a cedar. And it's thought of in terms of what element becomes the instrument to write a Torah. It's not like a pencil with ink on it. It's actually a quill that is said to be more fluid, like a reed. So it's just, I found it interesting that she took, and who knows, she could have been thinking of it in a different way than I'm, layering all this on, but I just found, wow, she's building back in these metaphors and associations. She's playing within the palette. Yeah. Other thoughts or sentences that you want to read that just like tickled you, or
I just think it's worth noting in the fish pond, the last part of it on how he wins over the child.
Yeah.
It says so much about his character.
What's the part, John? Do you want to read it?
And for any child who will not learn, I have a pond with fish.
Uh-huh.
I will win the student over with the fish. I call to him and appeal to him until he learns to read. So he doesn't admonish him or dismiss him. He goes around with another way. It's just says so much about him as a teacher and a person.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way she unfolds that. I'll go to that, or somebody can find that section. Yeah, so it's the bottom of page 2. We went out to, somebody want to just read that paragraph? Oh, Janine, I see your hand. Yeah. Oh, yeah,
It actually, I was going to make a comment,
please. Yeah.
but when I finished the story, I was reflecting on it. I was struck by the water themes of both rain and the pond.
Yes.
So there was that. And then when she fleshed out the teacher, there was this person who saw the other. He saw the little boy who was struggling, and he didn't punish him. He put his hand on him. He made this connection. So to me, this is someone who is very connected. And more than I was associating, and not just connected with the child, but connected with the elements, the people in the community. And when he does the prayer, there's a way he connects and rain follows. It just all came in that way to me. And then there's with the pond, the little boy, he both gets a fish, but he looks at the pond and he sees his reflection in the pond. And it's like he's been seen. His struggles have been seen by the teacher and reflected back to him. To me, that was really like she's just fleshed it out there. And when you said she brings a psychological aspect, this for me was the psychological aspect in the story.
Yeah. Not only does the teacher see his struggles, but like you said, he sees his own reflection. He sees his own.
He sees his face changing in the water. It was like, that was fascinating.
Yeah. Do you want to read that part? That's such a beautiful. I guess it's in that same paragraph.
I think it is in the.
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
Sure.
Yeah. Great.
We went out. The teacher told the other students to review their letters. The sun fell behind the hills. The sky lay suspended over the city as if giving it a once over. I could hear the chirping voices of the rest of the class, singing the Aleph Beit as instructed. We walked over to the yard behind the teacher's house, which concealed a garden with a path running along its length. I walked slowly beside him, conscious of his presence. At the end of the path, I saw a fish pond, round as an eye, like a patch of sky. The teacher stood still and encouraged me to move closer to the pond. I approached cautiously and caught a glimpse of the sky reflected in the water. A small mass of water vapor, almost unnoticeable in the sky above, appeared as a heavy rain cloud on the surface of the water. My own thin face, when reflected in the water, looked like the face of an older boy with full round cheeks. A light wind came and scattered the surface of the water into thousands of circles, and my face broke into innumerable tiny ripples that were all me. Life was pleasant there in the upside down double world. The sun cast forth rays of gold and orange and pink that blended in the blue water. I saw a beauty that I had not known before. It was the complete opposite of the awful drought we were experiencing then. From time to time, the fish would come up for air. The teacher extended a net that was tied to a long stick, skillfully drew out a fish, and placed it in my hand. Take it, he said. The fluttering of the smooth fins between my fingers shook my whole being. A moment later, the teacher held out a jar filled with water, and the fish leapt into it. In looking again at the water that was now calm, I saw my own face in its surface, as if I were created anew.
Oh my gosh, it brings almost tears to my eyes. I mean, I imagine we can all just deeply relate, when we've not understood and had a teacher find a way to us, or when we've been blessed to be able to do that for somebody else. But yeah, and there's so much, I mean, her use of language, just even in the "we went out," and "take it." I mean, these small sentences say so much about the shifting of the background and the point of view. Yeah. So Purim too. I guess I have Purim really on the brain, but this idea of, there in an upside down world, that's what we're headed into this weekend, is that what we can see from an upside down perspective and how much clearer it can be. Yeah. Thank you for that, Janine. I love being read to. I don't know. It's just so great. I could just listen all night. Good.
My reaction to
Yeah.
that paragraph, which is two favorite paragraphs in this story, I wanted to paint it. I wanted to paint the boy looking into the pond, and when the ripples happened, I wanted to paint that. And I'm not even an artist of much repute, but she's so wonderfully descriptive that you're there with the boy. You're the boy looking in the pond. It's amazing.
Yeah. Geraldine.
So I had a little side thing happen to me because I became so enamored of the fish.
Cool.
Because it fluttered.
I know.
It fluttered in his hand, and then it leapt into the jar. It wasn't placed in the jar. It chose to go into the jar. And it really evoked something in me to think about the fish and the relationship between the boy, the teacher, the fish, the pond. So I love that part.
100%. Yeah. And the fluttering, I had to read that a few times, like to figure out what was moving. Was it the fish or the hands, or and just the bizarrety of, I touched a worm the other day with my daughter, and it's like, we never touch animals in that, it's like, whoa. Yeah. It's so great. And of course, the metaphor of Torah being, water, Mayim Chayim. And, Torah is read every 3 days because it's like water. We have to drink every 3 days. So Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat. Yeah. Yeah. And did the boy become the fish, or was the learning the fish, that just leapt into the jar? So great. Yeah. Thank you, Geraldine. That's awesome. Good. Oh my gosh. Well, I see it's 8:15, so I'm going to take us a little further. Obviously, they're so beautiful. Yeah. So, I don't want to leave this one, but okay. Yeah, the last sentence, a smell so sweet, it was almost painful, the sound of the rain. And just to note, this phrase that's mentioned in the Talmud text itself of who causes the rain to fall or the dew to drop, that's a liturgical change that happens in the Siddur at the end of Pesach. Is that right? Yeah, the end of Pesach. So we just... we had it at Sukkot when we asked for the rain to fall, and then at Pesach we'll ask for the dew to fall. So it's tying us to the agricultural cycles as well. That's where that phrase comes from, and it's supposed to be referring to God. The one who causes the rain to fall is referring to God, but here it's the person who's praying for the rain, which is also, very rich. Wow. Yeah. And Geraldine, just for your sake, on page 6, The regular order of the universe is subverted when hand touches fish. So cool right there. Okay, everybody. So sisters, who wants to take us in? Maybe somebody who hasn't said anything or is just thinking.
I'll read it.
Great.
The story is told of two sisters who resembled one another. One sister was married and lived in one city, and the other sister was married and lived in another city. The husband of one of them grew jealous of his wife and wanted to bring her to Jerusalem to drink the bitter waters. That sister went to the city where her sister lived with her husband. Her sister said to her, "Why did you see fit to come here?" She said to her, "My husband wants me to drink the bitter waters." Her sister said, "I will go in your stead and drink." She said to her, "Go." She dressed herself in her sister's clothes and went in her stead. She drank the bitter waters and was found to be innocent. She returned to the home of her sister, who came out happily to greet her. She embraced her sister and kissed her on the lips. When they kissed one another, the sister breathed in the smell of the bitter waters, and immediately she died.
So one thing to note, just in terms of what's left out, for those of you who have or haven't read it, she leaves out what Noah just read. Of what Noah just read, the last two sentences. She leaves out, when they kissed one another, her sister breathed in the smell, and immediately she died. So in Dr. Calderon's unpacking of this, she makes a very strong stop right before that, which happens, just to bring another association, on Yom Kippur, when we are reciting the 13 attributes of Adonai, Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, Chesed, when we do that repetition, we also leave out the very end of that phrase, who bestows punishment upon the generations, which my teacher, Rabbi Arthur Green, really highlights, because it's also one of those curatorial power tools or power moves. Does that make sense? I know I said that a lot quickly. So in the recitation of these gorgeous attributes of God that we do on Yom Kippur to remind ourselves that God is a forgiving God, we don't keep singing the part that's mentioned in Torah, which includes that God will bestow punishment upon multiple generations to come. So it's a really interesting move that the rabbis do to use that text on Yom Kippur and use it only partially. So similarly, here she is using the text partially. Okay.
Rabbi, is
Thoughts,
that what you
ideas?
said?
Yeah.
Rabbi Green said to do?
Yes.
Leave it out. Okay.
Yeah, he just points out that that's what's happening in the use of the 13 attributes, is that the rabbis are doing almost I don't know how to say it without swearing, like a na to God, to say, you're forgiving, and leave out the part that says, gonna get you. So it's, it'd be like going to a friend or parent and saying, remember all the nice things that you did, without saying, and sometimes not so nice. It's very strategic. Sharon, and then Annette.
She really wanted to make this a story about sisters
Yeah.
and sisterly love. and what one sister can really sacrifice her life for the other. And she drew what's not in the short text there is what her sister was accused of, which was being unfaithful, and that she was actually carrying a baby, and that her sister went and took it on joyfully, actually, really felt no shame, felt no anger, and she really tried to describe what sisterly love can be. And I understand why she did not let her sister kiss her at the end.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. Yeah. And at the same time, the sister fell in love, with the husband. I mean, she was really open-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Does that resonate for you personally, Sharon?
Well, my sister died a while ago of a terrible disease, and I miss her terribly.
Yeah.
So whenever there's talk of sisters and sisterly love, it just brings up her memory and the love I felt for her.
Yeah, I could feel it when you were describing it. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and what you did for each other, I imagine. And probably what you're still doing for each other. Yeah. Go ahead. Was there more, Sharon, that you wanted to mention?
No, thank you, though.
Yeah. What's your sister's name?
Renee.
L'chaim Renee.
Thank you.
Yeah. Annette and then Geraldine.
I kind of liked in the reflection when she says that feminine loyalty, and this is on page 11, feminine loyalty will not triumph over masculine rule of the law. Actions must be met with consequences, and ultimately justice conquers all. So that really summed it up pretty well.
Yeah, she goes back into that context of the structure in which this story takes place. Yeah, and speaks to the kiss. Yeah, powerful. Geraldine.
Yes, I also, I'm trying to find it. I just had it on page 11 in the story that she's written. I found it very interesting that she interjected this sense of longing on the part of the sister who took the place of the other sister for what her sister had, and the recognition that she wanted it, and yet she was going to give it up. So that little part where she said, I wish I had more time before I had to divest myself of this life and give back the husband, the home, the new heart beating inside me. So that was very poignant that she did recognize what had happened to her in this journey that she did for her sister, and her willingness to relinquish it for her sister.
Yeah. And I also read that it sounds like she's also pregnant.
I couldn't tell that.
Yeah.
I thought maybe, but I wasn't really sure.
Yeah. It's a bit, I think there's a hint, a very pregnant hint. Yeah. Leah.
I read that a couple over and over again, that part, the 2 paragraphs there, just to see it, because she's talking about within 10 months, normally 9 months is birth. And then I was interpreting different ways about the new heart beating inside me, that could be a little one. But this was the first time she experienced love.
Yeah.
And because she didn't marry for love, she hadn't ever experienced this kind of someone wanting her and yearning for her the way he did, like the way he celebrated her when she was, at the end, that he embraced her. And So I also saw that it was like her own heart was
Yes.
created anew.
Right. Yeah.
I saw that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the biblical echoing of Leah and Rachel, right? The older sister, who, according to Midrash, at one point is under the bed of Rachel and her husband, kind of taking on the experience without being the chosen one, which is, so fraught, so complex, say the least. Yeah. I love in 11 where she says I searched within the Talmud's, I don't even know that word, peon. I don't know what that means, if anybody else does, to find the quiet obedience for the subversive story that lies hidden between the lines, between the letters. So it's, it's similar to how we think of Torah, just the role of Midrash in what's between the lines, between the letters, all of that. Anybody else? There's so much here. The story of Sota, if you've ever looked at that within the Torah, it's, so complicated. And the bitter waters, just to and Lucy, I think it was maybe you who did an amazing poem, right? You have an amazing Sota poem. Do you want to pull that up, or not at the moment? Okay. You're in a different planet. I can't hear you, but I can sense that you're.
Yeah, I'd have to go through all those
Okay.
poem files.
Okay, yeah, don't do it. But just Lucy is an avid poet on sections of Talmud and pages of Talmud. But the bitter waters becomes bitter because of the name of God being ripped up and burnt and put into the water. So it's this very fascinating, digesting of God. It's like Pesach, where you're eating, you're becoming part of the historic narrative, and it's kind of a figure 8, of process.
I did like the way she sort of tried to turn the humiliation around and say, I don't care if they, bear me. I don't care if they rip me, and all those men's eyes are on me because I'm part of this powerful ritual and I'm going to make it, my own. So I kind of like that, but this stuff is hard.
Yeah, very complicated. Yeah, and I was curious, and I'll just say this last sentence, but I was curious, I was like, oh, I could choose different stories, but then I was actually fascinated by how she put these two next to each other. And I started to think about, what she chose as the first story and how she followed that up with this story. And I thought, oh, I'll just select the stories that I want. And now I just kind of want to keep going in the exact order because I don't want to, I'm fascinated, in the way that I'm fascinated to see why she curated it like this. So I think I'm not going to mess with anything. So on that note, I hope you're having as much fun as I am with the book. And I think we'll go, let me just look and see. I think we could do, I'm wondering if we can do 2 or 3. Let's see what everybody else thinks. The other side is a bit longer. Oh yeah, it's a lot longer. So maybe actually it's 15 pages. So we might, I would say, do you all feel ambitious, or should we just stick with the other side? Seems like that might be enough. Yeah, okay. So let's just do the other side for next time. Great. And that'll give us a chance to kind of put the three next to each other and see what happens as well. Thank you all so much. And hopefully you've registered so then I can just send out a little note. But I won't, unless you need, if you need a copy, please just let me know privately and I'll be happy to get you a copy one way or another. Thank you all so much. Erev Tov. See you over the weekend, maybe at Purim, upside down time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Good
Thank
night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.